welcome back to Substack.coach. Today's video was requested by one of you, my lovely subscribers, so we are going to jump into how to use your voiceovers to start a podcast on Substack. So let's get started. So here we are on my publication, Fierce and Free, and this is just the home page to start with. Now, there are two different ways that you can do a podcast on Substack. One of them is to create a podcast with your home title. So, for example, my publication is Fierce and Free. And if I choose that as my audience, which I will show you where that is in a minute, then I will get a podcast tab on my Fierce and Free homepage. But I have chosen to do this the other way, which is I've embedded my podcast in my section, Willow and Rose. And this has done two things. And the first reason that I did this is because I actually wanted this layout, which after some back and forth with the Substack bot and the Substack help desk, I finally learned that the way to get this kind of a layout is to embed a podcast in this and not use the podcast. Once I actually use the podcast as separate podcast episodes, then this will look like a regular podcast on Fierce and Free, which looks similar to this, but has like a post at the top, which is your newest actual podcast episode. But because I'm just doing voiceovers right now, I get this really nice grid, which really shows off the art of this section of my Substack, which is why I wanted to do it. So I just really wanted this layout. So that's why I did the podcast to start with. And then I learned that I can actually use that podcast by putting my voiceovers onto it. So I'm going to jump over to the dashboard now and show you how to get that set up. So before you start on putting anything on Spotify or Apple podcasts or anything like that, you have to start on Substack if you want to use your voiceovers. So we're going to jump over to settings. And in settings, I'm going to go down to podcasts. And I'm just going to click edit here. So the first thing that Substack will ask you, first it will ask you if you're importing a podcast or if you are starting a new one, and you do want to start a new one for your voiceovers. But the next thing is the audience list, and the audience list is really important because it's the one thing that you cannot change once you've created it. So if I want to change my audience list to be Fierce and Free, the full publication, instead of Willow and Rose, my section, then I would need to create a whole new podcast and delete this one. So you want to choose your audience list carefully. I originally did it the other way where I chose Fierce and Free as my podcast. And then I decided I wanted to do the Willow and Rose as a podcast. And then my posts were splitting so that any voiceovers I did in the Willow and Rose section went to Willow and Rose podcast. And any voiceovers I did in the Fierce and Free section went to the Fierce and Free podcast. And I was ending up with two. So I deleted one, so I only have one. And all of my posts go to my Willow and Rose podcast. Even the posts that are not in the Willow and Rose section, I still can get them to go to the podcast. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Moving on. Once you have your audience list chosen, then you can change your podcast title and you can edit this at any time. And same with the description. This title and description is what will show up on any platforms that you export your podcast to. And then your podcast byline is where you'll put your name that you want to show up as the author, writer, speaker of the podcast. Once you've created the podcast, then Substack will give you your RSS feed. And this RSS feed is what you will need to put into Spotify or Apple Podcasts once you're ready to set those up. So this section, distribute your podcast, this basically just gives you the directions on how to do that. and this has very recently been updated. It used to be that you would click on it and get a help article, but now it's just embedded right into here. So I'm going to be coming back here and filling this out. Right now I just have Spotify. I'm not an Apple user, so it's a little more complicated for me to create an Apple ID, and Apple doesn't like the fact that I'm not an Apple user. So I haven't bothered with that yet. I also want to do a YouTube podcast, but so far I haven't actually done that. And I might do these two just because. We'll see. Now, the podcast categories you choose here, and then you also choose again when you go through the Spotify setup. They are much more detailed than your categories when you set up your actual publication when you started. There's a lot more options in the podcast categories. You can see that here. So this is, you can choose a couple categories. You should let your readers know if there's explicit or adult content, podcast language, and you can put in a podcast artwork, which I've done, but you can also put in so you don't have to put in podcast artwork is what I was going to say. You can put in just there is a little icon to start with, a little microphone. So you can just leave that, but whatever you put here is what shows up wherever you have exported that. And then when you're finished, you just save podcast settings. This, if you already have an existing podcast you're moving over, you can import your episodes. All right, so that is how you would set it up on the Substack side. Once you've finished that, then you want to go into Spotify for podcasters. And you'll want to either sign in or create a user. And then you'll need to set up your podcast on this side. So what it will ask you is, there'll be several steps to it, but mostly once you've set up your user, then it will ask you for your RSS feed if you're starting a new podcast, or if you're exporting a podcast to Spotify. And then you would click on the exporting a podcast to Spotify, and it will ask for your RSS feed, which, as I said, is right here. So you would just click this copy button and put it in Spotify. And then it takes a couple days. I think it took about 24 hours or so for it to really set up on this side. In order for you to actually put a podcast into Spotify or any of the other ones, you have to have at least one episode done on Substack before you can export to any of these other platforms. And then once you've gotten started, it's pretty easy to do. But I will go back and show you how to do that in a sec. So here you can see that I've already got a few things happening, which is actually kind of cool. And I've got a few episodes on here. Not that many. I haven't gone back into my history to make sure that everything is uploaded. And it looks like I might have forgotten to do my latest one. So we'll go back in and do that. And that will help us to see what's happening there. So in Substack, now we're going to go to posts. And I'm going to go into my latest one, Willow, Bend, Don't Break, which should have been exported here. And you can see that it is not, which might just take a couple days. We'll see. Okay, so if I go into Willow, and then I'm going to actually edit this post. So what you'll need to do first is, once your post is written and you're ready to record the audio, you'll go here to insert audio, and you'll click on the voiceover specifically. If you do the audio embed, it will not work. You have to do the voiceover. And mine is already here, but you'll have the option to either upload or record. So you can just record here on Substack. what I choose to do is I use Audacity. And this will make the recording longer, but we'll do a quick tour of Audacity. Audacity is a free program. So I can open my recent file. And we'll do this one. And basically what I do, and I can't play this for you because I have the free version of my recorder. So I have a little clip that has a bit of music in it, and then I start, after about 15 seconds of the music, I start my actual clip. So I've recorded this. You can see the record button here. I've opened a new project, and then I've recorded my voice reading everything, and then I export it as an MP3, which you can see here, export audio, and then I export as an MP3, and then I open this project, which is has all my clips in it, and I delete this family raw. This is my last raw clip that I imported. So I would delete this and import my newest one, which is up here, File, Import Audio, and then I would import this. So we'll pretend we just did that. And then I go through and I work through here. You can see that there's places where I've cut and clipped out my coughing and clipped out my ums and ahs and clipped out my mispronunciations. Hopefully I got them all. And once I have completely finished that, then I adjust. This is a forest ambience. I just like some background because when you record just your voice in a room, it can be really empty sounding. Like this clip might even sound fairly empty. And just kind of that hollow, empty room kind of sounding. Unless you have really good studio equipment and dampeners and all of that sort of thing, which I don't. So I just put in a background. This is just birds and wind in the trees kind of background. And then it doesn't sound quite so empty, which I like. So I just repeat that loop over and over again in the background with all my audio. And then I have a little closeout musical thing here. This was a longer clip. So then this closes out the end. And then when I'm completely finished, I go export audio. Oh yeah, and I was going to say that to clip in Audacity here, you would just put your cursor right where you want it, like that. And then I would do on the PC, Control-I. I think on the Mac, it's Command-I. And that creates a split. So I would do 2 splits and then delete the part that I don't want. I'm just going to undo that. And then that cuts out the pieces that I don't want to use. So it's pretty straightforward. If you're just doing a recording of your voice and cutting out mistakes, it's a really easy program to use. So I'm just going to X that out because I'm not working with that right now. And we're going to go back here. So I've done all that and I've imported that audio and it is now a voiceover here. So now I want to go to settings. Oh yeah, so I forgot to click this button. This is why it didn't show up here, my newest post. So once you have a podcast set up, you will have this option to add voiceover to podcast RSS feed. So I want to click that, and then it will show you episode notes. I'm going to edit this because the episode notes are the entire thing, everything. So I'm just going to delete a bunch of that. And I will probably just leave a couple paragraphs like that. And then we'll see if we can actually just delete a bunch here. There we go. It's kind of cool. I forgot to do this because now I can actually show you all the details. There we go. So now I have a nice podcast or episode notes. Nothing too long. And I will save that. And that's ready. I'll save that. Okay, so we have the episode notes updated, saved, and we're ready to roll. Now, because this is a finished and published post, I need to update the changes that I just made. So I'm going to update, and you can see in the publish page, if you are for the first time recording this, and you haven't published this yet, you're going to schedule it to go out. You can also do that here. You don't have to do it in the settings. You can set it all up in the publish page. But I'm going to just update now. There we are. Great. Now I need to replace this picture because obviously I don't want her waist. But anyway, I think it actually shows up fine on the home page. Yeah, there it has the top of the picture. That must be the smart cropping. Okay, so now that one should actually be a episode, which means it should show up here. We'll just see if it happens immediately. I kind of doubt it. Probably takes a bit. Oh, look at that. It does happen immediately. So there we go. Now that episode is here. So remember, you need to create at least one voiceover. And so set up your podcast first on Substack. Then create one voiceover episode, record it, and make sure it's voiceover. Go through the steps to add it to your RSS feed, and then set up your podcast export into Spotify, Apple, however you want to export that and distribute it. So, and that is how you do it. So now, as long as I remember to click that button, all of my recorded voiceovers show up here as just a regular podcast. And if I click on one, oh right, this one's still processing. Let's click on one of the older ones. Okay, not enough data. Let's see, this is just going to be the actual, let's see if I can go here. I have looked at this from the other side. Let's see if I can pull that up really quick. Just to regular Spotify. I didn't want for podcasters. It's just going to keep giving me Spotify for podcasters. Oh, here we go. And I actually don't use Spotify, so this isn't going to show much, but once it shows up, maybe I can click the search. Not yet. It's still loading. Okay, what do I want to play? Okay, recent searches. Okay, so this is one of my clients that I've helped set up his voiceovers as podcasts. And if I just click on mine here, oh, couldn't find that page. Lovely. That's great for an example. Okay, let's click on my other. Oh my god. I wanted to show you how it actually looks from the podcast, the listener side. It might work better if I actually log out. Oh look, it was probably going to pull it up too. See what we get here. Alright, search. Willow. Rose. Playlist podcast. Here we go. Willow and Rose, Adrian J. Okay, let's click on that. Alright, there we go. So this is how it shows up in Spotify. So you can see the about is everything that I put in the podcast description in Substack. And it even has the link to my Substack, which is great. And it has a list of all my episodes. And as well as the podcast notes description. So people can share it, save it, and a couple other things here. So, very cool. There we are. So there we go. That's how you use your voiceovers to be your beginner podcast. It's a way to kind of maybe dip your toes in the water of the podcast world if you haven't already created something. So hopefully that was helpful, and enjoy your exploration of voiceovers and podcasting.